When I walk into kindergarten and first grade classrooms and I hear students picking up a book and reading that book fluently, it gives me such joy. My name is James Boyd Jr. I am the Executive Director with KIPP Delta Public Schools in Blytheville and Helena, West Helena, Arkansas. For me, reading is an economic issue. There's not a single teacher I've ever met who did not say they care about their children. Well, if you care about your children, figure out a way that you can ensure that your child's going to be a proficient third grade reader, because, one of the things I used to always joke about is most newspapers are written on like a fifth grade reading level. That's a reason why more people will read a tabloid than the Wall Street Journal. Because if we don't ensure that our students are critical thinkers and really are impassioned about reading as a conduit, then we're failing them. The students that are sitting before us now are not the same students that were sitting 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or even longer, as someone who's been in education for so long. And so I think one of the things that we don't do well in education is understand how those things need to be adapted for our environment. I remember one year when I was an assistant principal, we did this thing about teaching students their learning styles. And I remember I had a young lady who was sent to my office for being disruptive in class. And when I was talking to her and I asked her what was the problem, she said, "Well, Mr. Boyd, I'm a visual learner. And all my teacher does is, have us writing notes. And that's not helping me learn." And I had a very difficult time administering a punishment or consequence to a student who had articulated what the problem was. And so if you think the Sage on the Stage process is still gonna work in 2024, when kids are playing Xbox and other games with 1080p or 4K, and they're getting all this pixelated data that's firing their neurons, and then they stand there and you're very monotone standing in the front of the class, you're not gonna have a way to authentically ensure your students are learning. And so what gives me hope about the science of reading is there's so much research about it. And I can share, as someone who's 50 years old, I remember way back in the 70s when I learned how to read, we learned how to read based on a lot of those components that are now part of the science of reading. One of the things I really appreciate is the fact that Lexia embeds assessments so that you get that data and it doesn't feel like the students are being tested, because that's what students really need. They need to, it's just like sometimes when you're teaching students, they need to learn, but they don't need to always know they're learning when they learn. I think the most important part of effective implementation is, instead of starting with the teachers, we start with the leaders and getting them to buy in, because I often think of the analogy like in medicine or even in law. Like, somebody goes to medical school, they have to start off as a resident and then an attending, and then they become a full doctor. But we'll give very enthusiastic people the keys to the classroom and don't provide that structure where they have to learn from another expert. And we don't have those structures in education where teachers, even with the science of reading, we need our novice, we need our intermediate, we need our experts, so that teachers also see that there's a path that they can take and they understand what it looks like. When I become proficient, I look like this teacher. When you give children that good, strong foundation, you can work on that language comprehension part. When I walk into kindergarten and first grade classrooms and I hear students picking up a book and reading that book fluently, it gives me such joy. A child can escape and see a whole world through a book. And we have to be able to give children that. If you spark a child's interest through a book, and now a child that lives in rural Arkansas says, "I want to be an astronaut," or "I want to be any of those things," because it's a character in their favorite book, we've changed an outcome. We've changed a life trajectory. And that's the beauty of reading. And so that's what excites me, is because I know more children are going to be able to read effectively, and love to read by using the science of reading.